weren't for the Cleveland Diocese in El Salvador, I don't think I would have ever fallen in love with the Latin American people that are part of the experience that we've had for 50 years of the Diocese of Cleveland being part of El Salvador, and that continues this day as I continue to be a pastor of a parish that has a large Spanish population. It's been a part of my priesthood that I don't think I could have lived without. It's a wonderful part of who I am and what has been given to me because of this experience in El Salvador. When I was ordained, I didn't even know El Salvador existed.
The conclave of cardinals has reached an agreement. The ancient signal to the world comes from the Sistine Chapel. Habemus Papam. We have a pope, in the traditional phrase of centuries. The throngs who have waited in the square of St. Peter's rejoice with 500 million Catholics around the world. Elevated to the papacy, Angelo Giuseppe Cardinal Roncalli, shortly before his 77th birthday. Chosen after one of the shortest electoral conclaves in 600 years, he will reign as Pope John the 23rd.
Many expected John the 23rd to be a caretaker pope, but in just under 5 years he really brought the church into the modern era. In August of 1961, 14 months before the start of Vatican II, he called for the church in North America to begin missionary support to Latin America. Cleveland quickly chose El Salvador because of the extreme shortage of priests serving a large Catholic population.
You won't believe this, but as I said, I read in the newspaper that I volunteered. It's the truth. I read in the newspaper that I was volunteered. I had an appointment the next day with Bishop Hoban. We did go to the missions that fast, but I was delighted. It was an adventure that enticed a lot of us, I'm sure.
He's living better. When I saw his wife and the family the first time, lived in a house that was all made out of sticks, with just a grass roof. And I don't know whether he'd be offended by saying it, but one of the things that impressed me so terribly was that the kids were sitting on the floor, and the pigs were there, and they were both all fighting over the same tortillas.
Well, spiritually, they had been abandoned. They did not have much in the way of the formation of any sort around the area. I think we were 6 priests for 500,000 people or something. It was awful.
We had something like 32 local areas we would go to, which went all around a volcano. I couldn't do now what I used to do then, which was climb up one side of the volcano and go down the other, or travel in by jeep to over hills and bumps and to far outlying areas to reach some of these places, which on occasion some trips would take you all day long.
So I remember the first visit I came was just so overwhelming. The heat, the dust, it was during the dry season, and so it was just so overpowering that way. And of course, I don't think any place you go, you expect the degree of poverty that you first run into when you first come.
The first visit that I made to El Salvador, I had a very bad impression of La Libertad, because when I got there, first of all, coming from the airport, there was a drunk in the middle of the road with a machete who was kind of dancing around, and then we just rode like right around him as if it was nothing at all. So I thought, oh, so these things happen all the time. And then we got into the town, but in La Libertad I was imagining to be more like rustic looking, like a little town like that you see in the movies, but it was a really crowded place next to the market. And the garbage heap was right next to the rectory. And then we couldn't park the car very easily to get my luggage out and all that other stuff. And then the smell was just terrible. The heat was awful. It was dusty. The road had been dusty, so everything was like, kind of gritty. And I thought, wow, this is going to be something to live here for a while. And then what happened to me, it was just a complete transformation. By the time I left, I was like missing the garbage. I mean, I was feeling like, I'm going to leave this place. You know, I really had to be dragged out of there because I just fell in love with the people. They were just so good.
El Salvador is a nation of extreme contrasts. The people are gracious and very friendly, yet they live in a culture that has been torn by violence almost constantly for more than a century. Gang violence, an offshoot of the Civil War of the 1980s, remains a major source of violence to the population. It has a natural beauty, a Pacific shoreline, verdant valleys, majestic volcanoes. But at the same time, its climate is tropically hot and humid, with two distinct seasons during the year, a rainy season and a dry season. There is almost no middle class. The economic disparity between the rich and the poor is simply staggering.
These are all refugees. In this community, these are all, this community did not exist when I was here in the 70s. And, you know, during the wars, but they built here along the river. And of course, what happens is every time the river swells, they get wiped out. Yeah. Hola, ¿qué tal, hombre? ¿De dónde vienen? ¿Qué estaba haciendo? Está bueno, felicidades. This is our youth group from this section, so see, they went on, they took a hike today. Of course, the laundry, see how I always get a kick out of, they put the laundry on barbed wire, this is clotheslines, you know, just like, what are we doing here, guys? But see the outhouse right here? Now, these are things that the city is doing, is making them put in decent outhousing with ventilation and a lot of poverty. Like my first mass, the collection was $2.50. You know, so it shows you where the people were coming from. These beach houses are beach houses. You cannot live in them. All these houses in San Blas, you can come on the weekend, but you cannot live here by contract. You build a house. Bueno, hombre, adios. But you see, it's a gated place. You know, we got people living in shacks, and look at these mansions they built for themselves to come here on the weekend. So, you know, it's just an amazing, you know, you talk about the dichotomy of the rich and the poor.
Throughout all the extremes, Cleveland's earliest missionaries worked hard to establish a structure of lay leadership and nurturing pastoral care. From the earliest days, we talked about educating the whole person, not just spiritual formation, but life skills. Women religious were vital in getting these programs off the ground.
From the very beginning, most of the women religious had been educators in schools, and I think they brought that talent with them to the missions. So they started out working to teach catechists.
Sister Bernadine Beltrinic of the Dominican Sisters is known as Madre Maria in El Salvador.
A very important part of our Family of God program is our weekly visit to each of the participating families. The immediate purpose of these visits is to remind them of the day and hour of the next meeting. But the real reason is to get to know them.
It was easier for the priests to acclimate themselves to the ministry than it was for us. They could always just go and say Mass, and the people came. Now, they didn't know us, so we had to, for example, go out and visit them, invite them, prepare programs for them, all of that. So but we were hands-on, which was a wonderful contribution that we could also help with the priests, so they are getting the understanding of what we see with the people and visiting their homes.
I remember some of the earliest sessions we would have in the catechist development. One of the very first things that we had the women do was to say their name in public, introduce themselves. I cannot tell you how they used to giggle, and they could hardly get it out. And by the end of the training sessions, you could see them growing in front of your eyes to becoming people who really had self-confidence and were proud of themselves. It was a wonderful experience.
Initially, people thought that the missionaries from Cleveland were just going to always give, and there were occasions that they did give in emergencies, but more often they helped the people to help themselves.
We always were trying to get them what they needed. I know a few of the sisters would be like mini loan sharks. Not that they asked for anything in return, but I know people would line up at the door of some of the offices, and they would come and they would say, "I need a machete," or "My container for water has a crack in it, it won't hold the water." So in little ways like that, we were able to help out.
I used to always tease them that, well, you guys keep working, I get all the credit because I'm the pastor, you know, and so on. But they're the ones that do all the hard work. They're the behind the scenes people. They're the ones that form the leaders. They're the ones that organize the workshops. They're the ones that help people to see, you know, who they are and where they are, lifting up people, and again, that empowerment of, especially of women. But that's a real need in the third world, to help the women to understand the gifts and talents that God has given them, and I think they have done that.
Cleveland priests serving in El Salvador have the daunting task of bringing the sacraments to the people, a joyful but often logistically challenging undertaking.
One of the things that was so necessary was for us not only to maintain the main church, but to go out to them. They are lucky if they come in once a month to go to the market into the town. So to be able to go to Mass on a Sunday or something like that, it was just impossible for them. But as we would go out in each of our communities and they would have liturgy out there and then begin to understand, I think that was so important, the outreach. So we have in all of our, the parish of La Libertad, over 42 churches, 42 church buildings where we go out to them every month.
I take care of 26 different little communities. When I arrive, I'm there for all the sacraments, whether that be baptism, the Holy Mass, weddings, funerals, anointing of the sick, whatever they might need, including catechesis, teaching the children, teaching the servers, teaching the lectors. So a typical day is not really very typical. It really involves everything that a priest is there for. Today is the day for it. This is the community of 13 de Enero, the 13th of January, which is the date of the earthquake. And we relocated a lot of people who lost their homes out here. We built the homes for them. This is where the chapel was, and I use this cornfield as my confessional. Talk about inspiring people to really admire and appreciate the work of our Lord.
Mostly what they need, as in any parish, is the priest to be present to them, to walk with them, to let them feel they're part of the church that they belong to. Somehow the people, when they feel a connection to us, they feel their walk with the Lord is more secure, more defined.
A major turning point in the history of the country of El Salvador and in the life of the Cleveland Mission was the 12-year bitter civil war, which began in 1980.
There was a lot of agitation beforehand, and there were death squads going around. There was also kidnappings, both by the guerrillas and also by military men who were doing it as a side job, so that they never knew who really had them.
You know, they warn you that it might be a little dangerous coming around the curve up there at Capulín. Well, I know what that meant. Better watch out, we might just shove you off the hill.
The conscription from the government actually consisted in a truck would pull up and the soldiers would get out, and anybody on the street, any unmarried young man could go, you know. So then sometimes the mothers would come running to me, and then they'd say, "They just took my son, and what am I going to do? I don't want him to go to the war," and so forth. And some of them were known to me, some of them weren't so known to me, but I'd always go. If the truck was still there, we had a chance, because I'd go to the Sargento or whoever was in charge and then say, "Listen, these guys are in the choir. Can't they come out?" And you know, they worked in the church, and the mother is so close to us and all that. And usually they would let it go.
On December 2nd, 1980, the war gained worldwide attention when two Cleveland missionaries, Ursuline's sister Dorothy Kazel and lay worker Jean Donovan, along with two Maryknoll sisters, Edith Ford and Maura Clark, were murdered.
We are men and women of freedom, of life, of love. In the picture of the religious women, you see solidarity. That is our identity as Christians. Solidarity, that is seeing the other as my brother and then helping in their needs. There are people that when you begin working on behalf of others, already say, this one is an enemy. They were branded as guerrillas, as communists. Why? Because they were dedicated to working with people, telling that the evil people call them that.
I remember calling her Thanksgiving shortly before she died, just a few days before. I could just tell that the evil of that situation was just weighing her down so much, and she just had this really, not that Dorothy was ever hopeless, but it was almost as if she could sense that that evil was overtaking that situation there. And in my heart, I often felt I could see her wishing anything so that that evil could be overcome, even to giving her own life for it.
It drew attention to the country because you can kill a priest or an archbishop and you call them Marxist. And of course, many people in the States' consciences, well, you know, another Marxist, another communist, we're fighting communism. But when you kill my second grade teacher, Dorothy Kazel, she taught second grade for a while, and you can't say she was a Marxist. And people begin to say, wait a minute, something doesn't compute here.
A determined propaganda campaign has sought to mislead many in Europe and certainly many in the United States as to the true nature of the conflict in El Salvador.
You know, there is a spiritual dimension to being a martyr that goes way beyond what we can really quantify. There was nothing else that sent the message out as much as seeing the bodies of those women pulled from the graves. It riveted the attention of Americans here, and that shocked the world. And nobody really cared about El Salvador before that. So it was in their death that the world became aware of the horrific things that were happening there with impunity for those people. And I think that that is what caused things to turn around.
We would try to give the people courage to keep working. Don't be frightened, you know, to know that God's with you. And they would say to us, you know, Father, you know, if things get real bad, you guys are going to jump on a plane and go home, and we're stuck here. But then when Dorothy and Jean and Eda and Maura and the Maryknoll sisters and so on, you know, gave their lives in service to the poor here, we came back to work with them, and they would say to us, you're now one of us.
Be free from your burden of sin. There is power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you or evil a victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood.
By the time I got down there, it was really different. We were now able to go out at night. At that point, we were able to even begin to start talking about human rights, which would have been a no-no back in the day during the war. What I found is they were at peace officially, but they didn't really know how to live peace yet. So a lot of what we did was help in that transition time of learning what it meant to not be at war, but to live at peace.
Before, the people had a sense of distance from foreigners, not knowing how to relate. But then the missionaries really drew close. we learn to realize that the foreigners also have a lot to offer us in terms of friendship, love, and sensibility.
They're wonderful people. They're explosive with joy. As soon as you connect with them, the smiles on their faces delete or put in the background the fact that so many of them live in such poverty. They have a joyfulness, a perspective, a faith that is so practical and profound that it affected me deeply.
Our current mission team is enjoying both the fruits of those early initiatives in education and laying the foundation for tomorrow's missionaries.
When I first came here in the Church of La Libertad, the school had about 90 kids in it. It was just 1st to 6th grade, and it was all the wealthy kids in town. And so we had to make a decision. Are we going to just take care of these 60 kids when we got 140,000 people in the parish in a country where half the population is under 15 years of age? So we decided we would expand, but then we would lower the tuition so the kids could get in, and then we, right now, have grown. We continually grow and grow and grow. I mean, I could build more classrooms and fill them tomorrow.
The latest and greatest of my projects that we're working on is a school. It's called the Catholic Academy of St. Peter. Catholic Academy revolves around teaching 6th to 9th graders about English, computers, the faith, and a different workshop every semester, like farming, carpentry. The intention with this is to give them study habits. So when they go to their regular school day with the mathematics and reading and all those things, they now know how to take notes and they're disciplined about doing their homework. But more than that, it's also helping them to be moral decision-making teenagers, so that the tough choices they're going to have, they'll be able to make more appropriately.
The Diocese of Cleveland first looked to El Salvador as a mission site because of its large Catholic population and a very small number of priests. Half a century later, St. Joseph's Seminary is home to more than 100 seminarians.
If there's one thing that characterizes the mission of Cleveland, it's the promotion of vocations, of which we are grateful. And not just the words, but with testimony, by example. The very fact that you leave your country, the missionary leaves his or her family to come here looking for the poorest places, because we have always seen in the Cleveland mission a preference for the poorest places on the periphery.
When the bottom dropped out of vocations in the late, the 70s, I think most of the other bishops then withdrew their commitment, but we hung in there.
I found that the people had their own gifts and they knew what to do, and they were teaching me more than I was teaching them. What they needed from us was our resources and our abilities to get them to where they had to go. And that's why I did a lot of work with the youth groups to foster vocations so that they could continue the work in their own country.
God has blessed the work in El Salvador. God has blessed the work here in our diocese. Because wherever there is a generous heart, sharing our resources, especially the human resources of those who have committed themselves. As St. Francis of Assisi said, it is in giving that we receive. We gave generously, and now we're receiving.
They've shared their culture with us. They shared their faith with us. I think they've allowed us to become better people, more understanding people of their reality.
If it weren't for the Diocese of Cleveland in El Salvador, Cleveland's view of the church would be a lot narrower.
The mission has been a blessing for us, the Diocese of Cleveland. That's the first thing that you can say, that I think it's always been the nature of the church to be missionary.
Plus the whole global thing, the connection of not just being here in Cleveland and knowing just the church in Cleveland, but knowing that Jesus came to teach all nations and that I was a part of that whole thing and they were teaching me that. I will never ever be able to repay or even to be able to express how grateful I am for those 5 years that I spent there.
I'd hope that Cleveland would continue to bless us with the presence of their missionaries for a long time. Only God knows how long. But I was thinking, I hope that we will not just be completing 50 years, but also 100 years and more 100th anniversaries. I can't see our diocese without the mission of Cleveland. We would miss that presence.
We've lived through a history of civil war in that country that speaks to the fact that, first of all, we're still there. The El Salvador mission after 50 years has really turned into what I believe is reverse mission. I think we originally went to El Salvador because there was a need based on the fact there are so many Catholic Sophie priests. These days, our presence there is who we are called to be as mission from our Diocese of Cleveland. Literally, I think we are a diocese that needs El Salvador more than El Salvador needs us.
I said I want to send some money to El Salvador. Well, the clerk looked at me with a real blank look and he said, to where? I said, El Salvador. He said, the city? I said, no, the country. He said, there is no such country as El Salvador. Well, that was 1964 or 5 or so.
It was Father Paul Schindler who took me after he had returned from El Salvador to visit. And when I went and visited there, as I look back at it, I said, I think I'm starting to fall in love with this.